Hello, hello everyone. I want to invite you to another episode with Whole Armor. My name is Gene Rice, and I'm excited to have you here. I'm excited to be here. And this lesson that we're going to continue to look at is called Measuring Work. Um, I titled it as a work session because I want to take a slow, slow approach so that we can look at the material. Also, another reason why I titled it a work session is I want you to be able to take notes as well as provide feedback. All right. Um, so that we can develop our understanding of measuring work. It's kind of vague, and I'm leaving it that way for a purpose so that we can draw away from the material what we need to draw away from it. Um, I could take you down a narrow path and just say, hey, here's the angle and perspective that we're going to look at. But I want to just present an array of thoughts about measuring work and then just see what you come up with in terms of your thoughts and your takeaways from the material. All right. So I want to get started, and I'm going to start where um, based on what we covered the last time. So, one area or one aspect that we looked at as it relates to measuring work was looking at the term called decision space. All right. And we said decision space is the bottom line, the space in which you make decisions. All right. And then we looked at four different broad areas um, whenever we're making decisions, just different lenses that we have on. All right. One of the lenses that we make decisions is based on width, how wide, um, the number of things that we're considering when we're making a decision. We looked at depth just very quickly. We're the depth and the height, actually, vertical. So we're looking at the different layers and levels in which we make decisions, the material, the information that's involved. And then we looked, another area we looked at were details, all right? The specificity of the information, the focus of what we're looking at. Details matter. And we're going to elaborate more. I'm just giving you a brief rundown right now. And then we looked at concepts. Concepts allows us to look at the bigger picture of what's going on. So to be able to step back from the minutia of what we're trying to decide upon and look at the bigger picture. Context matters here. It allows us to understand how this decision uh, derives and where it's going once we make that decision and the effects and the impacts that it may have. All right. Here's something, like I said, we're going to look at those terms a little bit more here in a little bit. But here's an area that I want you to consider when we're speaking of decision space. Think about the context in which we make decisions. Uh, I would always start with looking back as a reference point. Think back and consider how you made decisions in the past. What were the conditions that surrounded certain decisions that were made? What was the context, the backdrop, the other factors, the other elements that were involved when you were making decisions? Um, and how did that work for you? Did the context have a significant role, or maybe you didn't even consider the context. And if you didn't, was that a positive or was it a negative? Should you have considered the context when making certain decisions or not? It's something for us to explore. What about the conditions in which those decisions were made? Whether conditions having a significant impact or a low impact, or maybe no impact at all. And then how did that work out in terms of decisions or that were made based on your previous experience? Always taking a look at the historical record gives us a reference point. It gives us a starting point when we are looking at our current situation and our current um, uh, range of decisions that lay before us now. All right. Because looking back, it allows us to extract very common terms, lessons learned. Lessons learned. Lessons learned can be a benefit to allow us to make a more informed decision in our current situation. We're also able to take away best practices, what worked extremely well from your previous experience. You want to consider that in your current situation. You may not be able to replicate exactly what you've done in the past because, as I'm going to highlight here in a second, the context has a role to play. Conditions have a role to play potentially. All right. And based on those other elements, you can take those examples from the past and you can use that again as a framework. There may be some aspects that you can replicate, but then there may be others that you can't replicate, but at least it gives you a framework in which to work from. All right. So here's the point that I was making in reference to context. So when we're thinking about decision space, we're thinking about the width, the depth and height, the details that are involved, and the concepts and the ideas that are involved in our decision making. Then we also may want to take in consideration changes in the environment, changes in context, changes in conditions. Because if we just take a framework that we've used in the past and we just simply blindly apply that framework over our current situation, we may not get the same results because nothing really stays the same. Everything is constantly changing. All right. There's some things that are evolving, there are some things that are decaying, there are some things that are emerging, that are being birthed, and there are some things that are becoming extinct. And so you have to take in consideration all those different changes that are taking place and have taken place as a part of your decision making process. All right, just to point back to the what the work session is called, measuring work. Making decisions is a very huge part of measuring work. Work is not static. All right. The development and progressions of work is not static. And so, therefore, you're constantly engaging in some type or some form of decision making. All right. Moving on. All right. So, just a quick recap before I continue to layer the work session with information. So, we start out say, hey, 4 lenses you can look at decision making. Once again, uh, depth and height, the width of what you're trying to decide upon, details that are involved, and the concepts and the ideas that are involved as well. And then we talked about using your previous experience as a reference point. All right. Previous experience, thinking about the environment, the context, the conditions that were involved in that decision, as well as lessons that you've learned that you can take away and bring into your current situation, and best practices that you can bring from a previous experience into your situation. And from there, some things you'll be able to replicate exactly, but then there may be portions or significant piece, or maybe all together, that you just simply have to use the framework from the lessons learned and best practices of the past to help you make an informed decision based on your current situation. All right. Now, here are the last two pieces that I'd like to add that is important when we think about decision making. Um, when we make decisions, depending upon where we are in that decision as it relates to execution, it can also allows us to anticipate. All right, anticipation is very important when you're doing work, and that work is constantly having to respond to the changes in the environment, the conditions in the environment. There are all types of variables involved when you're working with people. Um, it can be very challenging because you can't always predict what people are going to do or how they're going to respond. So whenever you're able to make decisions in the right time frames, it allows one's ability to anticipate other aspects of what's going on. All right. I'll try and give you a quick example and then I'll move on from there. What I mean by that is um, when you consider those things that you have thought about, generally what happens, it sparks additional thoughts. It sparks additional aspects because you did consider this block of information. You did consider what was going on in this space, and what it allows you to move further in your look at what you're doing, and it allows you to start to anticipate some aspects that you may not have a clear-cut answer on right now, but because you know that there are certain things that are involved, there's a likelihood that there are other aspects that may emerge based upon what you do know. All right. And so it allows you to anticipate things that may not be well developed, or it may allow you to see things that you can't quite, hasn't quite emerged yet. All right. So I know those things are vague right now, but we'll continue to move on, and it'll all make sense as we start to find practical examples for this. Then the last one is predictability. So anticipation is a lot like predictability, but predictability, I like to think in terms of these are knowns that are on a recurring cycle. All right. Anticipation, it could happen, but it may not happen again. Predictability is something that you have a high anticipation that this thing is going to happen again. All right. It's on a cycle. Just like we go to work, there are certain things that you can simply predict because there are certain aspects of what we do that's the same every day. All right. And it allows predictability. Now, also, let's just say we've been given a new assignment, we've been given a new project. Well, if you start the planning and decision making process early on, it allows you to predict ahead of time what you anticipate or what you deem or what you consider. I know I'm just got a whole bunch of word salad going on here, but it allows you to see ahead and to start to predict that certain things are going to happen at certain times. It doesn't mean that it's going to happen exactly, but predicting does get you closer than things just hitting you in the face blind. That's a better position to be in, to be able to predict what's going to happen versus walking into something that just continues to hit you in the face and you're always on your heels. All right. I want to take my time relayering that. And then the next block, probably the next 5 minutes, I'm just going to do a download. And then we will discuss this in detail on the next episode. All right. Just as a recap, what is decision space? It is the space allotted for making a decision. And decisions is when you choose. It means to choose, select, or embrace. All right. It also means to exclude something, but you're deciding, you're taking. So if you're at a fork in the road, you're taking one avenue over another. It is a deliberate decision, a deliberate choice. All right. So we said 4 perspectives as it relates to decision making with. So when we think about with, we're talking about lateral. And we're talking about either short laterals or extended laterals. And what I mean by that is it means the amount of information that you're trying to cover. Depth and height. Again, layers, levels, and progressions is what we're speaking of here. When we talk about details, we're talking about specificity, talking about information, facts, figures, data, research. When we consider concepts and ideas, we're talking about big and small visuals, various puzzle pieces that we're linking together, putting together, which moves us into the next one, which is image building. We're building an image of what we're looking at. When we build an image that allows us to imagine, all right? It's just go with me here. So when you're talking about work, there are certain aspects of work where you need to imagine. You can see what it currently looks like, but there may be times where you need to imagine something different. All right, because again, context, conditions, requirements change. And so if you continue to apply the same old routine, same old framework, you may not get the performance or the results that you're looking for. So it's important to imagine work. And then with imagine, it's important to reimagine. All right. And that allows us to come up with an alternative image. Okay. I have other notes, but I want to dump this on you before I close. All right. Why is it important to measure work? Why is it important to measure work? I'm just going to throw some words at you. Viability and survivability. Generally, when you work, it has some aspect of it needs to be viable, and it has a survivability aspect to it. If you're in an organization, the organization, in order for it to remain an organization, it has to be viable. That whatever it's doing, it has to produce life. All right. The functions, the services, the whatever you're doing, it has to produce a reason for existence. So viability. All right. So that's one aspect of why we measure work, Because if you don't, those that don't measure work, eventually they don't become or they lose viability and they become extinct, which hits that second word, survivability. It's important to measure work so that you can survive and remain viable based upon why you're existing as an organization or why you're working, period. All right. All right. So I'm going to speak through these. Why is it important to measure work? Cost, time, credibility, integrity, security, protection, longevity, value, accuracy, development, growth, efficiency, efficacy. Why is it important to measure work? To get feedback, um, to validate your activities. So if your work is not producing something, then it may mean you need to look at the activities that you're doing and choose a different set of activities. We measure work so that we can understand performance, trajectory, trends, and I'll close it off on that. All right. So, work session. This wasn't designed to be um, framed up nice and neat and compact, but I want to give you to just present some information, and that's just a small portion of it for you to consider when thinking about measuring work in your decision space. All right. So I'm going to conclude this one. I'll be back tomorrow, and let me know what you think, and we will continue on in our lessons. So you all take care and have a great and productive day.